Good morning, everybody. I'm showing you a piece of art that we have here at Congregation Colony. I'm not technically supposed to have favorites, but this is one I particularly like. It is by a Swiss-American artist named Barbara Schwinn, and it's actually a print of one of her paper cuts. And for those of you familiar with Jewish art styles, paper cuts have been a serious art motif for Jews based on Central European folk traditions going back several hundred years. And this particular one, as you can see, actually tells the story of the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, or more traditionally, the Red Sea. And it also includes even a citation of the particular verse that it is illustrating. It has some value, but I particularly just like it for its stark style and because it invokes that theme of paper cuts. You can see the Israelites along the top of the image. As the Pharaoh's army is being swallowed up, the Israelites are passing in safety. So this just serves to open up our discussion for a for our Torah portion this week, which is Beshalach, and sent forth, in being sent forth, which is the portion that includes the climactic event leading up to the crossing of the Red Sea, the last of the plagues, and then the release of the people, then the crisis at the Sea of Reeds, and then the triumphant crossing, which concludes with the Song of Moses, which is we commemorate every single Shabbat by reciting Mi Chamocha. So it's a seminal event in our Torah portion. And in fact, I've always said that Exodus, the book of Exodus, actually has three climax moments. One is the crossing of the Red Sea. The next is the revelation at Sinai. And the third, at the very end, the end of season climax, is the building of the portable sanctuary, the Mishkan. So this is the first of three. It's sort of a mid-season exciting cliffhanger. And I wanted to talk with you about it. I'm just looking at the shirt I put on this morning, and I'm thinking, it's a little too informal. But it is what I'm wearing, so I'm just going to keep going. All right, Bishalach, of course, as I am akin to saying all the time, because it's so true, is that the story of the Exodus, our liberation from Egypt, is the master story of our people. It is our great story that we repeat again and again. It is the paradigm of the Jewish experience. For Christians, it's the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. That's their twofold event that defines who they are and what they believe. For us, it is God's deliverance of us from slavery in Egypt, and then providing us with a way forward at Mount Sinai. So liberation and the journey home is the defining story of the Jewish people, and Beshalach gets us on that road. So what happens in our Torah portion? Well, we've just learned that we're about to celebrate Passover. It happens. We are released. We get to, with invitation, pillage the Egyptians. So we come out not empty-handed. We have, what should I call them? Reparations. We have reparations, and we make our way. Now, God then alludes in our Torah portion that he doesn't want to take us the easy way, that is the northern route, which would take us along the way of the sea, which is the traditional way to travel from Egypt into the land of Israel. It's a relatively short trip. However, the history of that journey is that it is a much contested route with many threats. And so God chooses not to take us that way. Now, as it turns out, at the end of our Torah portion, we end up fighting with someone else. Whoever was threatening us, whether it be the Philistines or whatever along the shoreline, we end up having to wage war with the Amalekites. So it's not like the other route that God picks for us is conflict free. However, it's also the case that sometimes taking the easy way is not the best way. We'll come back to talk about that. So anyway, there we are. We're on the shores of the sea. We seem to be pinned there when we realize that Pharaoh has changed his mind yet again, and he has sent his army, chariots, warriors, to retrieve us and possibly even massacre us as an example to other slaves. And the people become terrified. They complain to Moses. Moses demonstrates that he is going to have the power of God to assist us. And then, of course, comes that most epic moment, that great imaginative visual, the thing that we recall over and over again. He parts the sea. The waters separate. We are able to cross on dry land. And just to wrap it all up neatly in a bow, when the Egyptians, for whatever implausible reason, decide to enter into that same path, why? I was like, oh my God, they laid a minefield for us. Why would I enter that minefield? But for whatever reason, the Egyptians charge into the same dry path, only to, of course, be swept up and drowned, which shows that bad generalship goes back a long way in the history of humanity. But in any case, and then once we get to the other side of the sea and we see that God has delivered us in the most complete deliverance, Moses breaks into song, a poem that is preserved in our Torah portion, a very long epic poem called the Song of the Sea, of which a small fragment we recite pretty much every time we get together to worship, and that's Micha Mocha, who is like you among the gods. So, that is our Torah portion. Oh, yeah, and then we travel a little further and we bump into the Amalekites and we end up having to fight them. Okay, so there are a number of worthwhile themes to consider in this. First, one of the great universals, God, that Jews continue to like to complain. We start out with the Israelites complaining that God has led them into a trap, losing faith in God, which is a very Jewish thing to do, and not anticipating that God or Moses has a plan B. But in fact, there is a plan B. That experience, the experience of the miracle of the parting of the sea and our deliverance, is so extraordinary, so fundamental, effectively, as I suggested earlier by drawing parallels, it's the equivalent of the resurrection of Jesus, only it happens to us all. We are delivered from the door of death, and we are brought through an unexpected, inexplicable path to safety. So, it's a miracle. So we struggle a little bit as moderns with the theme of miracles, and I know because I've had this conversation 1,000 times, people are always trying to reconstruct a plausible, rational reason for why this worked. First of all, we know we are talking about the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea, so it's not like a body of water that was dozens or hundreds of feet deep parted, that we probably crossed in some kind of marsh water territory. And that leads people to make arguments like, oh, the east wind that is described just pushed the water back enough for us to walk on it, and we perceived it as a miracle, or there was an earthquake that created a land bridge, or any number of theories are offered. But I always go back to the miracle. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I can't testify to the miracle. All I can say is that the sum total of Jewish experience is inexplicable. We can explain the minute aspects of Jewish history, why certain things worked, why certain things didn't, how we managed to survive despite all the forces against us. But taken in total, for 3,000 years, we have endured despite continuous opposition, despite frequent persecution, and in the sum total of the Jewish experience, there's some kind of miraculous force going. That's my position. And the Red Sea just embodies that whole experience. The idea that the water parted represents the improbability of our survival as a people. So I'm perfectly happy with the story of the miracle, even though I can't justify it. There are a couple of other things that come up in our Torah portion. We talk about the idea that Moses retrieved the bones of Joseph to take them back to the land of Israel and reinter them there, because that's what Joseph asked for several generations back. And so that reminds us that as Jews, we always go forward into the future with taking along with us pieces of our past. And that's a good thing. That I know in therapy we talk about the baggage we carry that we want to unload and things like that. But frankly, Jewish history is not just a burden, it's a blessing. And the fact that we get to take our past with us, whether it be in the form of Joseph's bones or the story of the miracle or the journey that brings us to Mount Sinai or the experience of Mount Sinai, these are all blessings that we should always hold with us wherever we go in the future. As Jews and as people, it helps us to know our past. So I think that that's an important theme that appears here. Um, and then probably the next thing I want to mention, the thing I'd really like to talk to, is about the difficult road to freedom. As I said early on, God seems to muse to himself that he could send us by the simple route, the via mare, as the Romans called it, the way of the sea, the route along the coastline. That today would take us from Port Said in Egypt along the coast to Gaza, and past Gaza to the area that we now know as Jaffa, Tel Aviv. But God doesn't take that. It would only take a couple of days to take that route. And God instead takes us through the Sea of Reeds, puts us right in the midst of the Sinai Desert, and then has us roam around for quite a period of time. It's the hard route. Now, it could be that God intended us to take a simple, a harder route that was actually safer. It doesn't turn out like that. But I'd rather like to think of it this way, and that is that it's more important sometimes not to take the easy way out. That in fact, the taking the hard path is both necessary and uplifting in a lot of ways, which is good because very rarely do we get a good, easy shortcut to anything. So we're going to be taking the hard path through life anyway, so we might as well discover the value in it. And it just so happens that this week is going to be MLK weekend, Martin Luther King weekend. I think that that is an interesting intersection because, of course, Martin Luther King talks about the difficult journey up the mountain. He talks in terms of his own and the black American experience of not being easy at any point, but that there is value in it and uplift in it. I also think of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela book. He wrote a book about his life called No Easy Road to Freedom. And while these are very dramatic examples, I think it rings true that the hard roads we take are often the most valuable. It's as simple as, for example, Shakespeare. Now, we could read the Spark Notes of a Shakespeare play in order to be able to have a conversation and make some judgments about Shakespeare. I would call that bullcrit. Bullcrit is when you learn just enough about a subject to formulate an opinion on it without actually having deeply considered it. And we do a lot of bullcrit in modern culture. We take a lot of shortcuts to things. Students often will just read the liner notes and not actually read the Shakespeare. But how much richer, how much more powerful, how much more can we learn by actually reading the play, by actually exploring the psychological struggle of Hamlet or the moral decisions made or not made by Macbeth or any of the other themes, the universal themes that appear in Shakespeare. We need to get down into, go back to our Jewish metaphor, down into the reeds, down into the weeds, down into the muck. And it is in that place that we discover the things that are great truths that will help us in the future. And so maybe the wisdom of God was this, that he knew that taking us the easy route wasn't doing us any favors, and that he took us on a longer, harder route. And in fact, we find ourselves fighting the Amalekites almost immediately. So here we are, a slave people without a warrior tradition, who have to stand up for ourselves right out of the blocks. And we do. It's not easy, but we do it. And we continue to endure and survive despite the many trials of our time in the wilderness. So that serves as a kind of narrative metaphor for our own personal experiences. It's never easy, but God is with us. And in the end, we will reach that place that we want to get to. So, with that, I'm going to stop and thank you for taking time with me this week to look at our Torah portion. Next week, we're going to find ourselves right up against Mount Sinai, and the second climax of our Exodus story will appear. So, have a great week. May you be blessed. Study some Torah and recognize all of the gifts with gratitude that we experience each and every day. See you next week.